Paris and win. We saw them in 1814, wearing spiky hats, bearing bows, arrows and spears, dressed in baggy trousers, with rope stirrups astride fluffy horses. They were the terror of our farmers, who had no concept of such people and especially of such outfits. Almost half a century had passed since then, and yet it seemed like it only happened yesterday. Everything witnessed by the 12-year-old Alexander would soon be described by the acclaimed writer Alexander Dumas. Chapter 1. On the other side of victory. Everything mixed up: horses, people, destinies, epochs, time. The famous poem from the school program, retreating this day and the next, we wondered when as our battle vexed. The battle took place on the outskirts of Moscow, in then relatively unknown village of Borodino. During the reenactment battle, injuries and death are not perceived as real, of course, and yet everything is exactly the same as it was on the historic date of September the 2nd, the same rain and muddy soil. And now the first troops begin to arrive at the field as final preparations are made before the fight. In just a little while the battle which had taken place 200 years ago will commence. As a matter of fact, the actual Battle of Borodino began at 6 in the morning and lasted until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The real-life version of the game of soldiers, every detail is carefully recreated. The entourage, the props, the fighting spirit. To complete the picture, we're only lacking the steppe dwellers and the Cossack army. As far as the enemy troops are concerned, the historical accuracy is observed in full. Are you the French army soldiers? Yes. For real? Well, you could hardly call us toy soldiers. Mamluks were here in Moscow in one division. Exotic and colorful military uniform in the spirit of the reconstructed era, only the boots are modern. Battle attire was also used as an additional psychological weapon, says Igor. There were no strict rules to abide by. This is simply the kind of clothing people enjoyed wearing at the time. It was certainly exotic. They used their appearance to intimidate the enemy. The Mamluks or Mameluks, youths of Turkic origin, mainly Kipchaks and Caucasians, specially trained for military service. Former slaves, frequently referred to as the white slaves, founded the dynasty of the sultans who led Egypt and Syria. By the early 19th century, they had become a ruling military feudal caste. The return of Napoleon from Egypt with trophies. They brought the Sphinx. All right, let us move. Arc de Triomphe, Paris, history under magnifying glass. This is the same thing, the departure of the Sphinx from Egypt. In this one, they are greeting the soldiers returning from the battlefields of Egypt. All of it is dedicated to the Egyptian campaign. The infamous Corsican returned from the banks of the Nile not only with victory but also with personal guards. One of the most famous Mamluks, after Baybars, became a bodyguard of the first consul Napoleon. This is the image of Mamluk Raza Rustam, who faithfully served in Napoleon's army for many years. People were always afraid of this man because in their imagination this man was very dangerous, you know. They had to protect their leader, so they slept right outside Napoleon's room. In addition to the descendants of Kipchaks, a privileged detachment of Mamluks, Bonaparte's multinational army boasted many other distinguished warriors, natives of the Great Steppe. This is a little-known fact. The Eastern cavalry had long been a cherished dream of Napoleon's. During his stay in Moscow, he was trying to organize his own Cossack troops in Poland, while remaining in Moscow himself. The army was supposed to include primarily Lithuanian Tatars, descendants of Kazakh Kipchaks, who had moved to the territory of Lithuania in the 16th and the 17th centuries. As soon as the company was created, it immediately entered the war and demonstrated impressive military talents on the battlefield. And after the defeat of Napoleon, 4 officers of the military division appealed to the War Ministry of the French Empire with a request to restore the unit. The Islamic formation was part of the Grand Army. In the city of Freiburg, Germany, a cavalry unit in the 1st Regiment was quickly formed. About 200 or 300 sabres, and that's how 300 Muslims found themselves on the territory of Western Germany. French colonies did not exist at the time. They could not have been brought from Africa or Turkey. Almost without a doubt, they were prisoners of the Russian army. The Muslims who had been taken prisoner, first in Russia and later in Germany, they were mostly Bashkirs and Kazakhs. However, it is a fact that French soldiers were a minority in the Grand Army of Napoleon. 700 soldiers were serving in Napoleon's army, about 1 million people. It was a motley army, to say the least. 55% of the army consisted of German soldiers, 10% were Poles, Croats and representatives of various other nationalities, including native residents of what is now known as modern Kazakhstan. It is also true that their names are not just a blank spot nowadays, but rather historical mystery. Chapter 2. The Cavaliers of the Steppe. 2,000 infantrymen and 300 cavalrymen, 400 artillerymen, 30 guns and 20 tons of black powder. Borodino 200 years later. A battle theatre 1 kilometer long. The viewers have already arrived, nearly 300,000 of them. The bloodiest and most controversial one-day battle, and it is still unclear to whom the victory belongs. Kutuzov answered this question so: the battle has been lost, but not the war. The words of Napoleon are no less vague. The French have shown themselves worthy of the victory, while the Russian acquired the right to be invincible. Under whose command do you serve? What do you mean, under whose command? Our Emperor Alexander Pavlovich I. Do you have a boss a little lower in the rank? Why, Kutuzov, of course. And who is lower than him? Denis Vasilievich. As a matter of fact, back in 1807, Denis Vasilievich wrote, "Massive crowds of Urals, Kalmyks and Bashkirs ravaged into the detour and the rear of the army troops, thus intensifying the horror of the invasion and helping to defeat the enemy." Denis Davydov, the leader of the partisan movement, lieutenant general, poet and, by the way, descendant of Genghis Khan by his own admission. Blessed be the memory of my ancestor Genghis Khan, a robber and a mischief with a huge moustache. There weren't that many Kazakh soldiers involved in the battles of 1812, only 5,000 warriors according to the researchers and all the volunteers. The former also confirmed that the dwellers of the steppe had not been subject to compulsory military service at the time. Not only the children of ancient Russia, but also the nomadic peoples were ready and willing to die for the Russian land, side by side with the native Russians. Kazakhs, especially those who lived along the Siberian line and all the way to the Uralsk line, were neighbors of the Ural Cossack and Siberian Cossack troops. They were well aware when the warriors were called upon to protect the homeland. It so happened that Kazakhs were serving in the Cossack troops, and some of them even converted to Christianity. For example, Jakub Belikov was baptized Kazakh. He served in the Orenburg Cossack army. Even before the events of 1812, he had been personally awarded by Kutuzov for his participation in the wars with Turkey. The regiment commanded by Jakub fought at Leipzig, Weimar, Ghana and other cities. Or the son of the Cossack regiment, orphan Kazibay of the Alim clan, who later became Nikolai Chernysh. He also began his military service as a private, then received a commission and went on to command 4 Cossack regiments. He distinguished himself in the Battle of Tarutino, was awarded the Order of St. Anne of the First Degree, and later became a Chevalier of the Order of St. George. Kazibay was killed in action on the outskirts of Paris. There were people of the Cossack social class, and then there were Kazakhs from villages, all coming forward to the aid of Russia. Orenburg, year 1837. Crown Prince Alexander, accompanied by writer Zhukovsky, came across 2 Kazakhs at the parade, who were dressed in rich national clothing. One of them turned out to be a Cossack constable who had with him a medal for the capture of Paris. The adjutant of the governor of Orenburg region would later write about this meeting. Here you have feasted and rejoiced, Vladimir Ivanovich, and I vehemently regret not having witnessed His Highness meeting with my fellow Kyrgyz countrymen, especially the messengers who have informed me of one thing. The man with the medal, his name is Narinbay. I can just see his wise appearance before my eyes. The second most mentioned individual after the Order of St. George Chevalier Narinbay Janjigitov is considered Amienbay Batyrov, a poet and a friend of the exiled poet Pleshev. Chapter 3. The Attila Syndrome. Little bits of history. 6 sons Kazakh woman Tatyana Tanatarova also fought in the war, as did Major Timirov, Yesaul Felix and Sotnik Yumashev. Biktimir Kulkin of the Tabyn clan, warrior Mailibayev, who received a silver medal for his bravery and heroism during the Battle of Borodino, Sergeant Karimbai Zindyagutov, who was awarded the honorary Blue Ribbon Medal. How many more warriors have never been identified remains unknown. Kazakhs served in the Cossack regiments and Bashki regiments. There were about 300 of them. In general, when we talk about the participation of Kazakhs in the War of 1812, we talk about the people who were participating in military operations, but also the people who were serving in the rear. Kazakhs provided the troops with food, cheap and good quality meat, carts and horses. In particular, during the period from 1804 until 1815, about 50,000 horses were purchased from the Kazakhs of the Bukayev Ord. Because what was the idea of the Napoleonic War? It was to ensure an economic blockade for Russia. And the people who resided just outside of the Russian border worked hard to provide for the troops in 1812. The final and most significant page of the history is the capture of Paris. According to one version, the army resorted to a clever stratagem which proved successful. The foreign regiments of the Russian army were the first to arrive in Paris under the guise of hordes of savages. They bore no weaponry or firearms, thus ensuring an effective attack of the psychological kind. Kazakhs presented a very realistic threat to the French army, because they were very dangerous and they took big part in the victory of Russia. The Russians have Mongol hordes fight against us. It appears all epochs have turned against us. These men, attired in leathern furs, know neither fear nor mercy. They scream wildly and crush everything on their way as they attack in packs. They are mowed down by multiple cannonballs, but even that doesn't seem to frighten or even stall them. They use bows and arrows which mercilessly strike down our gunners. Captain Clemenceau's Trekon was pierced by a Mongol arrow, and that arrow had flown from a barely visible point in the field. How soldiers flee from the battlefield upon hearing these multiple wild screams. It is unthinkable. Genghis Khan's hordes seem to have risen from the ashes. Evil Cupids, Northern Cupids, Parisians had many names for their volatile steppe army. Stripped naked to the waist for the enhancement of the intimidation effect, they rode astride fluffy steppe horses and camels. These people, dressed in unusual clothes, armed with unusual weapons and displaying a fierce and fearless demeanor, certainly made an impression. Europe had been stricken with the Attila Syndrome. The confrontation had activated a genetic memory of the past, the all-consuming dread that Europe had already gone through once during the invasion of the Huns. Lure the enemy in and destroy them. Use intimidation tactics to crush the spirit of your foe. An ancient military craft that has stood the test of time, a martial legacy of the dwellers of the endless steppes of Eurasia, the Scythians. Afterwards, this term, the Scythian War, would be used extensively by historians, and as a result, on the Champs-Élysées, in the Bois de Boulogne, and the place where the triumphal arch was being built to commemorate Napoleon's victories, Cossacks, Kazakhs, Bashkirs and Kalmyks were celebrating their triumph, the victory of the multinational army.